Rowan?
We're Group 6. I'm Roland, this is Rob, Keith and Darren, and for our tool we examined the Cage Distance Framework. The Cage Distance Framework is essentially a comparative tool that organisational managers can use to identify potential distances between countries. So just to take you through the agenda of our presentation, we looked at each component of the Cage Distance Framework. C is the cultural distance, A the administrative distance, G the geographical distance, and E the economical distance. We then looked at the benefits of using the Cage Distance Framework in business. We identified potential institutional voids between countries, and we looked at a real-life example of the Cage Distance Framework in action by way of looking at McDonald's. We then briefly looked at how the Cage Distance Framework is used at an industry level and finished just with a brief summary. So just the rationale for using the Cage Distance Framework and the reasons it is used in business today. Obviously a lot of frontiers still exist in the business world today despite the breakdown of borders in places such as Europe. The Cage Distance Framework helps managers assess the potential issues or barriers to entering a new market. The closer the distance between countries, the easier any potential transition will be. The tool can be used at both country and industry level, primarily at country level. And it looks at unilateral and bilateral characteristics. Bilateral comparing that of two countries together, and unilateral looking at one country in isolation.
So I'm just going to look at the first part of the Cage framework, which is C, the cultural distance. So looking at the bilateral side of things, so different languages that exist among different countries, different racial demographics, different religion, for example Catholicism in Ireland as opposed to Hinduism in India, the lack of trust and the degree of lack of trust that exists among certain cultures, and then obviously just the different values, norms and dispositions that are evident across worldwide cultures. So looking at the unilateral end of things, traditionalism, how well is tradition respected? In Japan, business tradition may be respected a lot more than, say, European companies. Insularity then, spiritualism, and then inscrutability. So how can a culture actually handle criticism, whether it be constructively or actually take grave offence to it?
Okay, so the next part I had a look at was the A part of the Cage framework there, which is the administrative distance. So with that we had a look at there the bilateral and also the unilateral as well. And with the bilateral, there is the obvious absence of political ties. There's also countries with a different currency. Being in the euro makes it easier for ourselves basically to trade with other European countries. Keeping the same currency will reduce costs. This is not something that's always going to be an option to us, so it is something that has to be looked into, trading with countries of different currency. Potential political hostility. As we know, there is countries at the moment that are politically hostile at the moment and are having trouble in their own country, and this would not make them an attractive partner to be trading with. There's then the absence of a trading bloc. So that's the like of the EU basically is a free trade within all European countries. And this is also going to be something that will have to be looked into when it does come to the time that we do have to trade with different countries. Institutional weaknesses are also another aspect of that. Then we go on to the unilateral. So with that there is the non-market or a closed economy. It's going to be far more difficult to invest money in, say, the likes of China than it will, say, in a European country. The extent of home bias, lack of membership in international organisations, and then also weak legislation, which can lead to corruption within a country.
So I took a look at the G part of the framework, which is the geographical distance. So the further the distance between countries, the chances of a profitable economic relationship is reduced. So this is due to transport costs as well as communication costs. So time zone differences, so obviously between UK and Australia there's up to 10 hours difference. Lack of land borders, so goods may have to be shipped overseas. Climatic differences, so temperatures in African countries may have effect on perishable goods. So unilateral, so this is factors to consider when investing in a country. So geographic size of a country, so the overall size of the country, for example Russia in comparison to Ireland, lacking internal navigability. So in Vietnam, for example, it's very hard to get around due to poor infrastructure. Transportation and communication, so these are very important in modern day business. So weak transportation and communications in the country would affect whether or not a business would invest in the country. So geographic remoteness, so this would affect supply, and lack of sea and river access would affect trade.
The final component of the cage distance framework that we examined is the economic dimension. Bilaterally, an organisation will need to consider if there is a rich-poor divide between their country and the country that they may or may not enter. This will have an influence on the policies and procedures that they implement and conduct in that country. There could be cost or quality divides in a number of different areas. Human resources in the country may differ a lot from human resources in the current country. Natural resources, some countries are obviously very abundant in natural resources, and the quality varies in that as well. Infrastructure, as Darren alluded to, can have an impact on costs if infrastructure is inadequate. And there could also be a knowledge gap between the countries in terms of how international business is done. Unilaterally, the economic size of the country will have to be taken into account, and whether or not that economy is in decline, is in recession, or is booming. The income per capita of the population is also a big influence on demand. This obviously needs to be considered. Income has a very, very strong relationship with the level of demand. Labour costs also must be accounted for. Labour costs vary greatly around the world, and in countries, especially in Southeast Asia, many companies have been located there. The labour costs are a lot cheaper than domestically. And finally, the level of inflation. Level of inflation is also a big influence on demand.
So I took a look at the benefits of cage and using this framework for an organisation. So companies can use cage to choose whereabouts to invest in the world and which countries would actually be beneficial to the organisation. So assess potential risks and barriers to entering new markets. So if the risk is too high, they should probably pull out of the investment. So this helps assess attractiveness of international markets around the world, and then understanding their organisation's position in the markets and how they fare against existing competitors within the country.
Okay, so I had a look at the institutional voids and that of cage analysis. So an institutional void is occurring where a country lacks the specialised intermediary needed for an organisation to succeed in that particular country. So it leaves the organisation with three options. The first option being that to adapt its business model, so that the company adapts its business model to suit, and so that it can become successful. Second option being to change its institutional context, and third option is to stay away from that particular market. So nextly, I just had a look at an example of each of these. First one being McDonald's, and adapting its business model to suit. When McDonald's entered the Russian market, it lacked suppliers that could basically give it the product that it needed. So what it did, it brought over specialised suppliers from both Canada and America to help out with Russian farmers so that they could produce the product that McDonald's needed. The second one there for changing the institutional context. An example I found of this was the Big Four going into the Brazilian market. The Brazilian market at the time had poor financial regulation. The Big Four had to ensure that this was improved so that they could actually succeed in the market, and did so. The next one there was staying away from a particular market. We've seen an example of this with Home Depot. They basically are a low cost firm and won't go into a particular organisation, especially when they have bad logistics, which will drive up their price, which will eventually ruin their main competitive advantage that they have of being a low cost firm. So then just cage in the industry. As we've seen already, cage has mainly been used across country analysis, but also can be used across an industry analysis. And basically done through the similar, looking at the same aspects of both. So first thing there will be cultural distance, administrative distance, geographic distance, and also then economic distance.
So I'm just going to look at the cage framework in action, and we've chosen McDonald's in India. So looking at the cultural distance, religion itself plays a huge role in the food that McDonald's can actually serve. Hinduism is the primary religion in India. As a result, nearly half of Indians are actually vegetarian. This is mainly down to the fact that the cow is considered sacred, and as a result, beef consumption is frowned upon. The majority of Indians also did not get fast food regularly, and this is something that McDonald's considered prior to entering the market. What McDonald's did is they customised the menu to suit Indian culture. So they put greater emphasis on vegetarian options and also chicken options, while removing beef off the menu completely in the Indian market. Looking at the administrative distance, different pricing structure and distance currency is evident in India. High levels of corruption as well at the government level in India can affect McDonald's policy decisions. Also, India and US relations are generally cooperative and there's no evident hostility. So this obviously is a positive for McDonald's who invested in the market. Going on to the geographical distance, the size of India itself means that many consumers are in remote areas that are not really feasible for McDonald's to target. It also has weak transportation links between borders and also internally. India itself did not have lettuce available to it, and they used the alternative of cabbage for, say, their burgers and food. McDonald's developed their own infrastructure to actually make lettuce available in India. Then going on to the economical distance, there's a high level of income equality that does exist in India. There's a very large economy, of course, but low income per capita. So there's the few very rich, and then there's the many very poor. McDonald's designed a pricing strategy to actually accommodate this, as the most expensive thing on their Indian menu works out at less than €4. So contrast this to, say, the EU market or the US market, where the highest price on the menu would be significantly higher. In conclusion, the CAGE framework is a tool used to evaluate the distance between countries in terms of the culture, administration, geography and economy. A company can use CAGE to assess the desirability of entering a target market. It also expresses issues and voids, which Keith went into, which may prevent a company from actually entering a market, and the option to adapt in order to exceed in the market, or to actually avoid this market altogether. Thanks for listening.